started. This is very exciting for me. So I'm Jenny Greenman. I am here because of Richard Greenman, but also friends with many folks in the room. I work in youth development, also in the theater. So I have a long association with New Perspectives Theater Company, which is the space that we're using today. I'm sort of doing a more formal hosting because of today of our kickoff session, but it's going to be much more of a integrated.
Jenny, you're breaking up and the signal is really.
We are planned to all. Thank you. So what we're starting here. So as I said, we packed too much into today's agenda. We might run over. If you need to leave, that's get up and use the bathroom. If you need more coffee, comfortable and take care of ourselves. So the basic structure is we have some folks online that we've asked to kind of prepare a little introduction, and I'll introduce them. Okay, so we're going to start with a sort of formal introductions and prepared remarks from our folks online. We were hoping for Moscow, we're hoping for Paris, we'll see what happens. Then we're just going to go around the room, introductions, what brought you here today, some nuts and bolts moving forward. How do you get to all what's our formula moving forward? We're going to have some volunteers take charge next, and then we will go home. How does that sound?
Great.
Okay, so I'm going to hang this up. This is so awkward. Cheat out. It's a Sunday morning, and we are in my church. So I'm going to take a moment to preach. I hope you will indulge me. Just to take a couple minutes to put our feet on the floor, to get the rest of our morning outside of us. If you feel comfortable closing your eyes, do. If you pray, please do. If you meditate, please do. If you just want to be quiet in this space, we're going to take a minute together. And we're going to invite our larger community into this space with us. So our friends in Skype, you're here, we feel you. We're going to invite our ancestors into this space with us. So I'd like you to think about someone that you've known in your life who taught you that other worlds are possible, that anything is possible, and that we have the power to make positive change. And think about that person, a teacher, a family member, a mentor, a colleague. Bring them in your heart, thank them, and know that they're here with us. And I'd like to call the people whom we may not have met, the philosophers, the activists, those folks who forged the paths that we walk on today. Think about who those people were. Know that they're in your heart, thank them, and know that they're in the space with us. And I would like to call into this space Puerto Rico and Mexico and Guadeloupe in the Caribbean, and Houston, and Flint, and the Rohingya, and Afghanistan, and Iraq, and the North Koreans, because it's not their fault, and all the peoples around the world. We invite them here. We recognize there's a lot to be angry about and sad about. We recognize that we have every reason to feel hopeless. And we recognize, welcome, how are you? We recognize the privilege that we have as so far all white Americans in the 21st century in New York City. And the recognition of our privilege fills us with gratitude. And that gratitude guides us throughout this process. We are not here to be right. We are not here to be smart. We're here to save the world and all the things in it because it is miraculous and it's worth it. And with that knowledge and that gratitude, we embark on our journey in this Sunday morning in my church, in my city that I love, in the universe, which is a miracle. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Skype. Thank you, Live. Thank you, Google. Look, first do no harm. We're going to hold you to ourselves to that. Folks behind me. So, does anyone need to say anything before we move on? Okay. Feel free. I definitely want to set this norm as a place where all ideas are welcome, where we collaborate, and we might have tension, right? Right? We might get hot, but we proceed with respect and care and our mutual objective. So we're gonna start with the non-NYC folks. David Schwartz person. Oh, pardon?
Hello.
Hi, David.
Hello.
So I'm just going to quickly introduce David, who's someone who's been part of our extended family for a long time. David is an environmental scientist and biogeochemist at Howard University. He's a Green Party activist, author of Solar Communism and Life, Temperature, and the Earth. And David, you have about 10 minutes to talk about what brought you here today.
Oh, thank you. That was a great introduction to this process, Jenny. Actually, I want to start with how I met Richard Green. I met him on November 8th, 2008 at a hysterical materialism conference. Oh, I should say historical materialism. After seeing his book, it became hysterical materialism. His book was Beware of Vegetarian Sharks, and I picked it up on a table, a display table, and then I went to one of the panels, and lo and behold, Richard, I think, saw me holding his book, and that's how I met him. We've been comrades ever since. Not that we agree on everything. So my personal introduction, I was born on Halloween 1943. The significance of that date is that my dad, I'm a red diaper baby, told me that I was conceived in celebration of a certain historical event in World War II. I think probably most of you know what that event was, the end of January 1943. Field Marshal Frederick Paulus surrendered at Stalingrad. So I have eternal gratitude to the Red Army. I know Richard may not necessarily agree with that, my perception there, but that's how I was born. And just briefly, my personal political history, which you asked me to do, is that I'll jump to 1953, 10 years later, when my dad took me to Union Square and I heard Paul Robeson on May Day. I don't remember what he said, but he had a very deep voice. That's my memory. I participated in the March on Washington in 1963, and I actually have a photograph of me sitting by the reflecting pool as a 19-year-old. I got involved in I went to grad school to Brown University, and I was arrested in November 1966 for participating into attempted citizens arrest of General Earl Wheeler, who came to talk to the students. I was sentenced to 6-month probation, but I was not kicked out of grad school. It would have been a very different result if it was more recent. I probably would be in Guantanamo Bay now. I helped to organize a Rhode Island Peace and Freedom Party, which was the forerunner of the Rhode Island Green Party. And then I started teaching at Howard University in fall of 1973, and I got active. I moved to DC in 76, and I joined the DC Statehood Party, which became actually one of the first Green parties perhaps in the US, because it certainly had a Green program. And of course, it launched the struggle for statehood, which is ongoing, for the right of self-government of the people that live in DC, which is close to 700,000 now, more than Wyoming and Vermont, by the way. So I got involved in what followed up the DC Statehood Party, the DC Statehood Green Party, which became part of the National Green Party. And I got involved in a lot of stuff on the budget, on taxes. I've been testifying to the DC Council on this for nearly 15 years. And then DC became the first human rights city in the United States, which is a UN program. And what that represented is that the elected officials said that, yes, we recognize ourselves as a human rights city. Of course, far from fulfilled. And we have had assessment reports on and gave grades on how DC did as a human rights city. And as you might guess, the grades for the welfare of children and so on were F. We have a long way to go. We have very high income inequality and high child poverty, and this is the capital of so-called free world. My research, which was alluded to, I won't get into that except for the most recent, which is when I collaborated with my oldest son. Our website is solarutopia.org, which we have a 2011 report, which we did, which modeled global solarization, and actually was the first, to our knowledge, that actually estimated how much existing energy is needed to replace itself, because you can't create something out of nothing. And so we modeled this mathematically. And let me get to I only have a couple of minutes or two left, right? I don't want to take any more time. So let me just say that I have uploaded, or with the help of Richard, a couple of my pieces and that I've written for Capitalism, Nature, and Socialism Journal. And one is 4 scenarios for 2050, which in a way I hope captured some of this project. And of course, I hope to take seriously Richard's provocation to do a lot more in this regard. So let me just say finally what I mean by solar communism. From each according to her ability, to each according to her needs. Okay, and that her refers not only to humans, but to nature. So that was the reconceptualization I sort of came up with in 1992, and I published a paper in 1996 in Science and Society with that title, and it was really in large measure a critique of Georgescu Rogin's so-called fourth law of thermodynamics. So actually that, who we should acknowledge as the father of ecological economics, but he and Jeremy Rifkin, with Rifkin's help, propagated this fallacious law, which actually has been which have been used by to bad consequences among certain thinkers, in my view. So let me conclude with that, and I'm looking forward to participating in this project. Thank you.
Thanks, David. We have Brian. All right. We're unmuting you. Brian Tokar is up next from Vermont. He is a participant of the Institute of Social Ecology, an activist, a teacher in the movement, author of Toward Climate Justice, and very lovely human. Yeah, there we go. Brian?
Yes. Hi, Jenny. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm going to try to not go back as much into my early history as David did, of course that would take a long time, but very briefly, I'm about a dozen years younger than David. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, saw the end of the Vietnam War movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, and all its ups and downs, starting when I was in high school. I got to go to an activist high school in Manhattan and learned about left politics fairly early on, though I grew up in a family that were, you know, good sort of Kennedy liberals and was not exposed to radical politics at all, other than through the fledgling alternative media when I was younger. But I got right into things, studied biology and physics in college, and went on to do a few years of graduate work in biophysics and neurophysiology. I immediately got very tired and frustrated with that, and started really putting all of my energy into the environmental and political work that I've been engaged in ever since. I started coming up here to Vermont, partly thanks to my friend Barry Feldman, who's here with us today from Chicago. Got involved with the Institute for Social Ecology, moved to Burlington and studied with Murray Bookchin for several years. During the same period, I was very active in the height of the anti-nuclear power movement, which, because of its combined commitment to direct action, decentralized organization, and a quite radical vision of a decentralized solar future, really shaped my understanding of what's possible, both from a movement perspective and from a long-range social change perspective. I did anti-toxics work in the early stages of what eventually became the environmental justice movement. I was active in maybe the first 10 years of green politics in the US, starting in the early to mid 1980s, back when we had the idea that the Greens were going to be much more than just a political party, but really an earth-centered network of social movement activists that were also engaged in political work at the local level, partly inspired by Murray's early work on libertarian or confederal municipalism, and saw the Greens kind of evolve toward aspiring to be more of a conventional political party on the national level, at which point I pretty much walked away from it and got focused on other things. I spent many years primarily focused on issues around food and genetic engineering, fighting GMOs in the early years of their commercialization, both locally here in New England with a big town meeting campaign and doing events in major cities all over North America, challenging the annual conventions of the biotech industry. And then about 10 years ago, I started shifting back toward focusing primarily on climate and energy issues, started doing research and writing on climate justice at a time when very few people here in North America were aware of that term, the early messages coming primarily from indigenous activists around the world, from representatives of various land-based peoples movements, and then gradually beginning to engage people from the environmental justice movement here in North America, and then in the lead up to the Copenhagen Climate Conference in 2009, starting to engage people whose roots were in the global justice / alter globalization movement that had its height here in North America around the actions that shut down the World Trade Organization in Seattle in 1999. One of the things I've written that was originally written, and this is available in your Dropbox, I think, if you have access to the Dropbox folder that Richard and others have put together. It's an article I originally wrote for a social ecology magazine in Norway in the immediate aftermath of Copenhagen, and then eventually got reshaped as a chapter in my Toward Climate Justice book, which was published by the same folks in Norway that published the original article, the New Compass Press, which is really the leading social ecology publisher in the world. Another book of theirs that's relevant to what we're doing here in this program is my friend Dan Chodorkov's book, The Anthropology of Utopia, where he has several chapters looking at ways to revive the utopian tradition, something he taught for many years, both at the Institute's programs and at Goddard College. I should mention I'm teaching in environmental studies at UVM now. Toward Climate Justice is actually my 6th book. I've written 3 and edited 3, starting back in the 80s with The Green Alternative, which was used as a basic text by a lot of the early green groups around the country. Edited a number of books on food and biotech issues, continue to be involved in the Institute for Social Ecology, and also have been on the board of the 350 chapter here in Vermont, which was really the first to establish itself as an independent local group affiliated with the International 350 network. How am I doing for time? I didn't keep track of when I started.
2.5 minutes.
2.5 minutes. Okay, so I wrote this article in the aftermath of Copenhagen. It got reframed as a book chapter. It was written partly in response to the diplomatic failure of Copenhagen and the increasing popularity at the time among circles of people who identify as radical environmentalists with a really nihilistic outlook that they basically argues that only by a total collapse of civilization as we know it can we see a means toward preserving biodiversity and salvaging some of the more enlightened elements of the way people relate in order to recast the future. And that was clearly unacceptable from any number of points of view. And in this article, I reached back to a number of utopian currents, both from social ecology and other traditions. Some of my experiences from the anti-nuclear movement around the coupling of oppositional and alternative seeking approaches in the climate justice movement. Those two currents, this is more recent work than what's in that article, but it's those two currents have come to be symbolized on the one hand by the notion of blockadia, popularized by Naomi Klein, but really originated with the young and older folks who did actions over a period of about 1.5 years to blockade the southern leg of the Keystone XL pipeline in Texas and Oklahoma. Blockadia as this kind of new global geographic space that appears in places all around the world wherever people are organizing to block the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure. And then the alternative current came to be symbolized in the lead up to the Paris Climate Conference in 2015 by the French Basque term alternativa, which was the name for a actually a bicycle tour around the perimeter of France through the summer and fall of 2015 that visited important alternative projects throughout the country and really set the stage for some really important conversations in the alternative meetings around the Paris Climate Conference. Also the notion of direct democracy coming from social ecology, the idea of humanity as products of human consciousness as a product of natural evolution, leading to understandings of how we can participate creatively with nature instead of as an obstacle to the furtherance of natural evolution. The inherent obstacles that capitalism raises to realizing the potential for the kinds of technological and political transformations that we know are possible. Last source I want to point you to is a terrific collection that's a museum volume. I found it in the library at UVM. It's not available in any form online, but it's a product of a collaboration between the New York Public Library and the National Museum of France, which did an incredible exhibition on the utopian tradition. And it's a large format museum volume with incredible illustrations from throughout world history and some really brilliant essays by historians and social theorists looking at the importance of the utopian tradition throughout history. There's a kind of a one-page handout that I can share that I use as a slide at the end of a lot of my presentations on this that pulls together some of the key quotes from that book and other sources that I used in my chapter, all pointing to the idea that meaningful social change requires a coherent vision of where we want to go and how to get there, that the utopian impulse has played an essential role in the evolution of social movements from the earliest formations that we can describe as social movements in the Middle Ages up through 1848 and on to the present, and that without the utopian dimension, we're inherently limited in our ability to achieve the kind of change that's necessary. So this is an exciting and important project in that direction.
Thank you, Brian. It's sort of our theme today. I just sort of assumed we knew why we're here, but we'll talk about that too. So I think we have Sam in the house. In the virtual house?
Yes, I'm here.
So,
I'm here.
Sam Fassbinder, a professor at DeVry University. So include utopian dreaming and bundled natures, Karl Marx and futurism, and climate change mitigation in fantasy and reality.
That happened.
So Sam?
Yes. I'm here. I'm here. I cannot claim the sort of history of activism that either David or Brian can claim. I spent a fair amount of time trying to devise an intellectual framework whereby I could actually believe in all of this that I was doing. I did a sort of preliminary activism between, say, 1992 and 2004 for the Green Party when I was working with the late Walter Shesby, whom some of you might know if you were in the Green Party. At any rate, my general radicalism was formed in the early 1980s when I was a student at University of California at Santa Cruz, and I received a bachelor's degree in literature from them and went on to get a master's and a PhD. At any rate, my most recent efforts in trying to form a position that I could subscribe to, right, that I didn't really feel was trapped in some kind of intellectual cul-de-sac or was generally hopeless, started more or less last year when I started researching the history of capitalism following the path marked out by Jason W. Moore, and then applying this to the various literatures that I had read. And so I have a lot of material now in Capitalism, Nature, Socialism, the journal, and I'm working on a book that will be tentatively titled, or that is tentatively titled at present, Utopian Dreaming and Climate Change. My first paper is in a journal called Knowledge Cultures. It's called Climate Change Mitigation in Fantasy and Reality. Its central argument is that what counts as environmentalism or climate change mitigation today is based on environmental accounting. And the idea being that we can do a bunch of so-called green things, and if we do enough of these green things, then it will add up somehow to climate change mitigation, using some sort of fantasy of that will, some sort of fantasy of transformation, whereas, in doing these green things, what we really want is for everything else to remain the same. And the alternative path I'm suggesting is one of what sort of society could we form that would be capable of physical, according to the laws of physics, climate change mitigation, as opposed to the fantasy climate change mitigation that you see in, say, the UN Environmental Program webpage or other such, propaganda for environmental accounting. And so the book will proceed forward from there to outline a sort of history of utopian dreaming. And here I'm very much interested in what Brian Tokar has been doing. And a general history outlined more or less already by the late philosopher Cornelius Castoriadis that would talk about how the social imaginary has proceeded through history, and to suggest more or less a transformation of the social imaginary and a quick divergence from the capitalist path altogether. Now, I live in Southern California presently, and I've lived there for most of my life, and this, to be honest, isn't really much of a place for political activism. We have lots of freeways you can travel on, though, and so, that sort of more or less accounts for what I do. I, as an intellectual effort, we have lots of great libraries too. I do donate food to a food bank every week. I volunteer my efforts at a farm at the local college, the Pomona College farm. And I grow plenty of crops there, so I'm, involved in urban gardening, as that were, and be interested in hearing more of what other people have to say about that sort of thing. At any rate, I guess I'm going to see the remainder of my time, and if anyone has any further questions, we can deal with those later. Thank you. Mute. Where's the mute?
Thank you. Great. Thank you, Sam. Do we have Harry? Do we have Harry? Harry.
Yes, you do.
Hi, Harry. You're up next. Where are you in the world? You're not in Paris.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can't hear me. Okay.
Yes. We can
Yeah.
hear
So
you.
I had a friend who had a funeral, so I had to come home. It's a bit sad occasion. So you can hear
Thank
me?
you for being. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay,
Thank you
so
for being with us. I'll just introduce you quickly. As an internet revolutionary and activist, team member of World Wide Web Consortium, and author of Social Semantics, The Search for Meaning on the Web, and probably our expert in this area.
So I'll just be very brief because I came late, and essentially what I'll be looking at is the kind of revolutionary or counter-revolutionary factors involved in the digital and social movements. I have some background in this. I worked in indie media when it was sort of forming. which is a sort of early social media site for social movements around the anti-globalization era that kind of spread across the globe. A lot of the early concepts inside indie media became very central, and even some of the same engineers built social media companies like Twitter. Now, of course, instantaneous low latency communication ends up being incredibly useful for social movements, including anti-capitalist social movements and utopian social movements. However, what we learned, after the Snowden revelations and through WikiLeaks and through many current leaks and hacks, is that now the internet has not only become a train of communication, but a train of control. So internet technologies are used to spy on, to locate, and to even arrest activists as well. So on some level, you have a very dialectical relationship with the internet. The internet provides means of open and free communication, which were previously just did not exist, and made it very hard for global social movements to communicate, much less coordinate to solve the really hard economic and ecological problems that are facing them. So this is genuinely new development. On the other hand, the internet is one of the most dangerous things that ever happened to social movements. So what I think I'll go into, I don't know if I can hear you guys anymore, is I'll just go very briefly whenever we do the whole lesson into both practical things that radical anti-capitalists can do to defend their communication from surveillance. We'll probably overview the impact of communication technologies on social movements across the world. Most recently, Occupy, Tahrir Square, but also, the current situation in Syria with Rojava. And we'll look a little bit at the history as well and the use of technology in utopian situations. So I think probably the most interesting thing we might want to bring up, and when we go into this subject a bit deeper, is on one hand, you have the work of people like Lewis Mumford. So Lewis Mumford had this great division between what he called monotechniques, techniques which increased centralized state power, and polytechniques, techniques which increased individual autonomy, decentralization, and essentially led to kind of new kinds of social relationships. And this really comes out in a debate that Lewis Mumford has with B.F. Skinner, B.F. Skinner being the famous behaviorist, who in his Walden 2 imagined a society that was very happy, but perfectly controlled and surveilled. And then, Mumford struck back and said the point of technology should be the free development of fully actualized human beings. And so we'll trace some of this debate through computing history, both from debates between Babbage and Ada Lovelace to the modern era of big data, social physics and machine learning and artificial intelligence. And then, so we'll show how people can both defend their autonomy on the internet using technologies on encryption, looking at things like leaking, Snowden, Manning, all of this stuff. And then we'll also look at how technologies could be used in utopian situations where they're not controlled completely by the short-term interest, profit-seeking of capital. And I think this is an era where there's lots of great work to be done. We'll draw on some of the same thinkers that Brian and other folks are drawing on, such as Murray Bookchin, but we'll also look, of course, at Karl Marx, who had lots of interesting things to say around technology, some of the more academic post-Karl Marx stuff, but also some of the real practical technology and the practical stuff developed by engineers, particularly Richard Stallman and the free software movement, and currently the craziness going around Bitcoin and Ethereum. So I hope that's useful for everyone, and that's just a quick summary of what we'll be going over.
Thank you, Harry. That's exciting. No, I'm not. I have in the house, and who else? Or who's our last person I haven't gotten to? Oh, okay, excellent. All right, Barry. We've never met before. I have no introduction for you except that we're so happy that you're here. So, tell us about yourself. Hold on. You're muted. We should do some hand signals, right?
We have a sign somewhere.
There you go.
I can't unmute it. We can't hear you because you're muted yourself.
You're muted, Barry. You got to click the unmute.
How's that?
There we go. The collective.
All right. Well, yes, I'm very happy to be here with you all today. I do not have the kind of creative work product that the people who've spoken before me have. I've been retired from activism for like 20 years, though I've been, say, a voracious critical reader. Brian's a real old friend of mine, and we've been in touch for a long time. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking, and I was telling him about how I've been coming to realize just how important utopian vision is, and how some of the things that Murray Bookchin has written, like come back to me, and well, not to go into more detail maybe than that. And Brian's, well, you should really participate in this thing that Richard Grieman is organizing. Here, let me send you this link. And here I am. So what can I tell you about myself? Well, I grew up in New York City. I got very interested in economics in kind of a schizophrenic type of way. I eventually received a PhD in thoroughly neoclassical economics, but my understanding of why economics was an important thing was grounded in like a vision of economic history, say from people like Ernest Mandel and Eduardo Galeano, maybe, and as an activist then, as Brian and I stopped a nuclear engineering program for training Iranian nuclear engineers, or I guess we didn't actually stop it, but we put some holes in the tires anyway. And as active in the anti-nuclear movement, and also very much in the Central America movement in the 80s. Since then, I got inducted into the into the full-time work economy or something, and really it's not very active and have not been very active for a very long time. But sort of keeping up my reading and thinking about things, maybe I just throw out a few names as a way of indicating the direction of my thinking, and I turn the microphone back. In terms of utopian vision, I guess the names that come to my mind may be different than yours. I think of like Riane Eisler, David Abram, and Paulo Freire as writers that really I feel have potential in terms of generating that kind of vision. In terms of, and then there's this kind of historical perspective thing where, yes? In terms of historical perspective, some names that come to my mind, like Pamela Underwood, Charles Mann, and I guess current political perspective, maybe like Thomas Frank. So with that, I'm really glad to be here. I'm very interested in what people have to say, and let's see where things go.
Thank you. All right. And we have Moscow in the house. Alexei, Privyet. Alexei and Julia. Hello, welcome to New York City.
Hello.
Alexei and Julia are co-founders of the Praxis Center for Research.
We are ready.
They're ready. All right. Great. They're awesome. So talk quietly. Don't shout. Don't shout.
Yes. All right.
I'll let you guys go ahead.
So good day, everybody. though it's an evening now in Moscow, we are very glad that you invited us to participate in this forum. And we are here, Yulia and Alexei Gusev. He is a French translator, and I am a historian at Moscow University. And we are from the Moscow-based Praxis Research and Education Center. This Praxis Center was created in late 1990s by people who, from the years of Gorbachev's perestroika, participated in various democratic and socialist and anarchist movements in Russia. And I am going to talk about our organization, Praxis Center. It was organized by people who felt the necessity to build an alternative to both crude private capitalism of Yeltsin's era and to Stalinist reaction. This group united various socialist left anti-totalitarian currents, including Trotskyists, anarchists, social democrats, democratic socialists, and so on. And our main tasks we saw exactly in research and education. Therefore, the Praxis Research and Educational Center was reflected in our practical activities. The first activities had been international, organizing international seminars, other forums devoted to various aspects of history and contemporary movements, forums almost every year from the end of 90s in Russia and Ukraine. And some people who are present here participated in these forums, including, of course, Rick and David. The second direction of our activities had been book publishing, and we published both collections of articles written by people from our circle and also books translated from foreign languages. And we published, for instance, Victor Serge, several books of Victor Serge, including his memoirs, books of Raya Dunayevskaya, Maximilian Rubel, Всеволод Volin, Hal Draper, Vilibaldo Solana, Jonathan Neal, and also biographies of Carlo Rosselli and Lev Kamenev. And this important direction of our activities was possible for a significant extent due to the support from National Victor Serge Foundation and Richard Pearson. And the third form of our activities had been library work. We organized Victor Serge Public Library in Moscow that collected books and journals on the history of progressive social and political movements. And this library, with its collection of more than 6,000 items, in Russian and foreign languages, helped Russian audience, which included both researchers and activists, to learn about ideas and history that has been suppressed in our country. In 2013, in the situation of growing pressure on the independent NGOs in Russia, we decided to transform our library into the part of the Moscow Public Library of History. Now this collection is called Victor Serge Memorial Collection in this big Moscow library. And then our activities consist in participation in various progressive political and public campaigns, such as anti-war campaigns, defense of political prisoners of Putin's regime. And over the last several years, we established close ties with the Russian independent trade union movements, Russian free trade unions, organizations, and also have several common projects with the Memorial Society, Human Rights and Historical Society in Russia. National partners are, of course, Victor Serge Foundation and the Global Labor Institute with a center in Geneva. At the present moment, the situation in Russia is very, very hard for all kinds of independent society associations. In the beginning of the 21st century, the neo-authoritarian regime was established in our country, a regime that serves a small group of billionaires closely tied with the tops of military and this regime suppresses democratic opposition. This regime started war against Ukraine. This regime intervened to save terrorists, Assad regime in Syria, and supports most reactionary semi-fascist forces across the world. And inside Russia itself, it also stimulates most reactionary tendencies, chauvinism, clericalism, etc. A recent example, there is now a campaign of Orthodox Christian fanatics against the movie allegedly insulting the so-called Tsar Nicholas II.
Okay.
You're right.
Well, if he writes you back and there's more, we'll do that. I'm on. Great. I'm on. Great. So our next sort of official, our next and sort of last official presenter is our convener, our lead imaginator, Richard Grieman, who's more comfortable standing, but you do need to come.
And in LA, good afternoon, my friends in Moscow. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself and more about the basic idea of why I've asked everybody to come and join in this international discussion. And the word international to me is essential. I was born in 1939, just at the time when the Nazis Poland and divided it up with Stalin. So this is imprinted in my genes, especially since I'm a third generation red diaper baby. I inherited from my grandfather, Sam Levin, an immigrant worker from Russia who moved to Hartford, Connecticut. I inherited his autographed picture of Eugene Victor Debs, the socialist candidate for president when Woodrow Wilson put in jail, and his library. And I have not basically changed my outlook since my teens. I was involved in the civil rights movement, and I was fortunate enough coming up in the 50s to have some wonderful mentors and teachers, among whom were Mike Harrington, who recruited me in 1960 for being against the war in Vietnam. The Social Democrats and moved to the right, always a danger. Then I went to France to study and fell in with a group called Socialisme Barbarie and fell under the influence of Castoriadis, who's been mentioned here, and one of whose important work is on the reading list for next week. Coming back to the United States, I met Raya Dunayevskaya, a former secretary of Leon Trotsky, who had broken with him at the time of World War II, and who had decided that it was no longer possible to defend the Soviet Union, and analyzed it for the first time as a capitalist society, a state capitalist society. And that turned out to have been an important discovery or an important point that she made, because we have seen in subsequent times, and even then, that private capitalism and state capitalism are interchangeable. And in a place like China, you've got them mixed together. So, and the other thing that pioneered was the rediscovery of the humanism, the basic humanism of Marx. She was the first to translate his early essays. Okay, I'm moving closer.
Speak a little slower, please.
Oh, slower, okay. I'm always conscious of the time limit, so I try to squeeze in as much as possible. All right, let me take a deep breath, as my daughter always recommends. Use my diaphragm, very good. Okay, so internationalism then is part of my education and my basic outlook. In fact, Marx himself, who famously said that if there's one thing I know I'm not, it's a Marxist, called himself quite simply an internationalist. And I think that takes us a long way. And I'm very pleased and very proud that we are doing something original here, which is having in real time online and in this studio, an international discussion about the fate of the world, which is basically on the table and up for grabs. Some of my international engagements involved going to Nicaragua to see what was happening down there and to defend them against the Contra attacks. I've been to North Africa, where I have very deep relations in Morocco with the resistance movement there. At the present time, very much embattled in the Rif, which is a part of Morocco that's always been in rebellion, and with my dear friend Mati Monjib, who is facing 5 years in prison for supposed treason, but in fact for speaking his mind and defending human rights. And of course in France, where I spend half of my time. And finally in Russia, where as soon as Gorbachev opened the country up, my daughter and I traveled there. In what year, Jenny?
I think 89 or 90.
89 or 90. In any case, we traveled there with the first group of informali. That is to say, people who were not invited by Intourist or by some government organization, but activists in America and in other countries who went there to meet with activists and dissidents and so on. And these links have remained. One of my great interests and the subject of my studies, as I took French, was a Russian writer who was a Russian revolutionary, who was a French writer, Victor Serge, who was a great witness of the Russian Revolution and its degeneration into Stalinism, a great resistor, and someone who has left a wonderful record both in fiction and in nonfiction. And it was when I went back to Russia to see if I could find some of his papers, because he was arrested and sent to exile on the Ural and so on, that I met Yulia and Alexei, and we became fast friends. And together we started a whole series of international projects. The first one was called Books for Struggle. And again, with the help of Jenny, we gathered together 6,000 books of non-Stalinist, anti-Stalinist, feminist, trade union, all the different resistance movements in the United States, and somehow managed to ship them to Russia. And I could still see Jenny, packing up the stuff, remember, in Brooklyn and so on. In any case, there were 2 or 3 shipments, and we had big problems with customs and so on and so forth. But we got through, and Julia and Alexei and other friends started a Victor Serge library, which made these books for the first time in 70 years. Russians had access to all the work that had been done in the West. And those books, as Alexei explained, are now, because we had a hard time with the repression there, keeping the library open. We were kicked out of one place and then another. And finally, we found a good place as the Victor Serge Memorial Collection in a Moscow library, the same one that goes all the way back to Ryazanov and some of the old librarians who defended the books that Stalin tried to repress. So we're part of a long, long tradition of thought and resistance in Russia. Now, let's take us to 1997, which was the moment that I had the inspiration for this international project. We received in Moscow an invitation to participate in South Africa. All right, so we're looking at the northern part of the world and the southern part of the world in the formation of an international network for a socialist alternative. And I ended up going there as the delegate from Moscow and entered South Africa that had been newly liberated, and met with Neville Alexander and a whole bunch of other people who had been in the jail in Robben Island along with Nelson Mandela. And there were delegates from all over the southern, from Brazil, from the island of Mauritius, and many other places, including other countries in the southern part of Africa. And to me, going there, this was just such a thrill. First of all, to be a newly liberated South Africa was just breathing a new kind of air. But the idea that we were connected and the internet had just come in, you know, that from Moscow I'm going to South Africa, and that instead of having yet another Fifth International of squabbling leftists who were based either in Paris or in New York and who were going to top down, direct the newest world revolution consisting of 6 people in a telephone booth. Instead, we were going to be a network. And the sense of what a network is, and of the connectivity of the internet, and of the sense of network as something that we also were seeing coming out of the feminist movement and coming out of Latin America, this seemed to me very, very important. And I wondered, well, what do I have to contribute? So I thought, and I wrote a paper to present this and it was called A Vision in 3 Parts. And it included the idea of liberalism and the new period that and here's a picture of the modern archimedes. Now in the picture you see, it says in French, okay, my Latin just get mixed up a bit, give me a lever long enough, right? There it is. And a place to stand, and a fulcrum. Here's the place to stand, the fulcrum, and I will. Now that's a thought experiment. Obviously, there's no place where Archimedes could have stood, but his ideas transformed the world. Machines made all of modern technology possible. Now, let's look at these 3 elements. The lever is an old one that we're aware of, at least since 1848. It's the lever of international solidarity. And that's the essential strength of all the people in the world, the 99% we say today against the 1%, the working people against the capitalists, many different ways of phrasing it, but I think everybody understands what it is. But the problem is how to make it effective, because 1848 was the first international revolution, and it was based on new technology, new forms of communications technology, the telegraph, so that the revolution spread from Paris to Vienna and eventually to 112 different nations in what was called the springtime of nations. Fast forward to 2011, and we see how the same thing happened, spread from North Africa to Wall Street, to Greece, to Spain, and so on. So to me, the internet is the latest iteration, but a very important one because it is a network, because it is horizontal, unlike broadcasting, which enables people like Churchill, Hitler, Stalin, Roosevelt, and the rest of them to beam, and of course all the commercial people, to beam down stuff at us. This way we get to talk to each other. So that's the place to stand that we have now. The internet is a place to stand where we can communicate, where we can organize, and where we can eventually unite. And one person who reviewed my book said that I stood for a flash mob to save the world. I had another metaphor in my book, which was a woman's dance festival that takes over the world. But one thing or another, clearly this is a new technology, but also reflecting a new form of organization, no longer top down. And this is what we're trying to imitate here, and what the Praxis Society in Russia does, where we have anarchists and Marxists and social democrats and all kinds of people united in resistance and reunited in discussion. to the third, which is again a relatively new one, and that is what I call consciousness. And I date planetary consciousness from the year 1945. Why? Because World War II, jeeps and all kinds of things to every part of the world, New Guinea, for example. Suddenly, the vast majority of human beings never knew that they were living on a globe. Most of them didn't know that beyond the next village, or at least the county seat, that there was a big world out there with other people. Suddenly, this war brought both technology and what they call cargo, that is to say, all the different things and all the different people in the world together. And unfortunately, this discovery that we all live on this one green globe, discovery of its vulnerability, because Truman's use of the atomic bomb and later Nagasaki could have been the destruction of the Earth. Oppenheimer thought that there was a finite chance that the whole world would take fire. And right now, Mr. Trump, who has vowed to destroy North Korea, evidently ignorant of the fact that with modern weapons, which are the smallest tactical weapon is like 20 times the power of the Hiroshima bomb, could quite simply provoke not just the global warming, but something even more sinister, which is that the debris will go into the atmosphere and it will create global winter. The sun will not be able to penetrate and everything living will simply die. And that can happen in a matter of days and weeks after this atomic war that he's playing with, as Kennedy did, along with Khrushchev, when I was a young activist in New York and making speeches in front of the UN and so on. So we live at a very, very critical time. On the one hand, we're faced with sudden death by global winter and slow death by increasingly accelerating global warming, climate chaos, and so on. The reaction in the world is like, it ain't happening. Fortunately, even through these 4 big hurricanes, the Weather Channel and most of the big media, they never mention anything like global warming, much less climate chaos. So that is why it seems to me it's important for us to gather together here, to exchange our ideas, to publish something that gives us hope. See, Naomi Klein was perfectly right when she said that no is not enough. All of us, as you've seen, are part of the resistance movement and have been as long as we were able to be conscious. But clearly, a vision of a different world, and not just a different world, but one that we can get to. That is to say, a road or paths leading from here to there. Clearly, you can't organize people of no. People need a vision. They need something to fight for. So even though we are just a small group of people connected by the internet and sitting in a lovely theater here on 37th Street in Manhattan, our role could be potentially very important. So we put on the internet a sketch of a utopia and a sketch of different roads to get there. And what it's called futurehistorians.com. Excuse me, futurehistorians.org. Thank you. And one of the purposes, one of the finished products, so to speak, of this gathering is for all of us to contribute to developing this very, very crude thing that I just thrown together 10 years ago and put up online so that it becomes a credible, a realistic, believable vision, not just of a desirable future society, but of a practical way to get there. Now, the chances of saving the world may be slim. My dear friend, Wallerstein, Emmanuel Wallerstein, gives the chances as 2 to 1, okay? That's the odds. It either will happen or it won't, and I think that's a very logical one. I'm a little bit more pessimistic, and in my book I said it may be 1 chance in 100. But if there is 1 chance in 100, we want to be able to imagine it. Just as so many things were imagined in science fiction that have now been realized in fact. So just recently, I hit on this idea of looking backward. Of course, Looking Backward is the title of a famous utopian novel by Edward Bellamy, which came out in this country around 1895, and which literally created a whole socialist movement, because there were Edward Bellamy societies sprung up all over the United States, and through the Chautauqua circuit that sent radical lecturers all over, and that's another project which we have, which we'll talk about later. This was the basis of the new rebirth of socialist society. And then the next utopia that came along was William Morris's much more beautiful vision of a less rigid society in News from Nowhere. But the problem with all of these utopias was that they never explained how we got from there to here, from the grim reality of Victorian society with its smokestacks and oppression of child labor and so on, to these beautiful visions. So that's the task that we decided to undertake by imagining quite simply that the world did survive, and that there really were historians in the year 2117. It was a phrase that I had written in my book where I had said sarcastically, future historians, if there are any, would say. But suddenly I said, well, let's see what they would say. So we're looking back at 1917, excuse me. No, I wasn't really that far off base. We're looking back right now at 1917 and many of the wonderful groups that Michael is organizing with the Marxist Education Project. But you know, nobody in 1917 had heard either of the Bolsheviks and even less of Soviets. The Soviets, which were created, a horizontal type organization by the workers, were seen as competition or something not quite kosher by the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks, who then tried to take them over when they saw that they were here to stay. And as far as the Bolsheviks were concerned, they were not even the majority all over the world. The word Bolshevik means majority, but they were thousands of members, and the members were tough and resistors. Nonetheless, nobody in the intellectual world at the time could possibly have predicted that the Soviets, combined with the Bolsheviks, would have overthrown the Tsar and started a world revolution, which, if it hadn't been for the Versailles powers at the end of World War I, that put the German war criminals back in power in order to crush the German Soviets, the workers' councils that had developed there at the end of the war. That was the big turning point, because Bolshevism made no sense at all as a Russian phenomenon, because Russia wasn't ready. But Russia, as the first step towards a world revolution, or at least a revolution in the advanced countries, Russia combined with a socialist Germany, agriculture and industry, that was a hope for humanity. And so famously, at the Versailles peace thing, they not only imposed horrible sanctions on Germany, on the innocent people of Germany, but Marshal Foch, the spokesman for France, said famously, better Ludendorff than Leibniz. That is to say, better the German butcher than the German socialist. And that's Hitler, and produced the world we live in today. Now, so there's 1917. Now, let's look back from 2117 to today. All around us, and the previous people who have introduced themselves and the people who are going to introduce themselves here in our studio have all been part of that resistance. And whether you take permaculture and gardens on rooftops in cities, whether you take indigenous resistance in Latin America, whether you take the peasants revolting all over Asia because Monsanto is imposing things that they can't afford and things that the planet can't afford, and they commit suicide because of debt and so on. And the students are everywhere in the world who are in debt and see no future. Whether you take China, which has at least 100,000 strikes of a violent kind every year, challenging a government which combines the worst aspects of private capitalism and totalitarian communism. All these things are happening. Obviously, the major media is not looking at them, and very few historians and political scientists are looking at them. But our job is to see these little elements that are existent and real, okay? Real things that, if they combine and develop, could, at some point in this sorry 21st century, come together and overthrow capitalism on a world scale. How this will happen, that's something that we're going to play around with. But it's always seemed to me that instead of sitting down and having discussions among ex-Trotskyists and ex-Buchanan, the anarchists, Bakuninists, and then expelling each other from a group of 7 because of deviations, we can trace different parallel paths to a better world and then play with them to see where they play out if we just stick to our one rule, which is no gods, no extraterrestrials, and that the realities have to be played out to their end. So a revolution that takes place, for example, by an armed central committee and so on, we have to look at when such things have been tried and what kind, not that they weren't successful. We've had many successful revolutions by armed central committees, and we see where they've led. So if we stick to this very simple principle that we have to remain within a certain realistic logic, maybe we'll come up with something that could possibly inspire people in the future. That's what I have to say, and thank you all. I want to thank a whole lot of people who are right here in the room, okay? I'll start with Michael Lardner, who for years has devoted himself to organizing socialist education here in New York and now in New Jersey as well, and which is practically international from our point of view.
Well, we traveled to Philly and met people from Mobile, Alabama, Portland, Oregon, and Corpus Christi, Texas, who are all trying to do the same thing, which was a great moment back in August. So.
Great. I want to thank my daughter, Jenny, who very modestly just introduces herself. But she, in fact, has been the wheel horse of many of my earlier mad plans to save the world, and the person that holds me in check a little bit. And I want to thank Fred Murphy and now Dan, who has joined us, who has got a wonderful mind and whom we're going to hear from from his experience as a revolutionary and so on, but he has the technical skills and he's made this possible. And it's a dream basically come true. So if this dream can come true, then maybe the dream that we're going to dream will come true. So we could all sing a chorus of John Lennon's Imagine, but maybe we'll move on and introduce the people who are in the studio. And then at the end, we'll have to talk about nuts and bolts and how practically we're going to move forward.
What's wonderful is we've already broken from the past in that we're running ahead of schedule, which has never happened before in the history of left meetings. So congratulations, everybody. Is it hot in here? Do we need AC or anything? No, we're okay. All right, let's push forward again. Folks are getting coffee and snacks. Use the bathroom if you need to. So I think it makes sense. Fred, do you mind? Fred and Michael, and then we'll kind of just go around the room and just no stress, no frills, just your name and why you came here is perfect. If you would like to, if you'd like to give a little bit more about your perspective or your history, we'd love to hear that. But please, at least your name and how you feel comfortable. And then, yes, we're going to get to the sort of nuts and bolts because this is an interesting course with lots of pieces. So we'll make sure we all understand that. And we're going to have some volunteers. Don't make us voluntold you for who's going to be in charge of next week. I'd love to start with Fred because you're really the man from Oz here, the man behind the scenes, the man behind the curtain. This is a terrible metaphor, Fred.
For better or worse. For better or worse.
And listen, I'm going to suggest, can we stand sort of here so that we're not cutting off the people behind us? We don't want to privilege the digital media at the expense of our live friends.
Okay, so I'm Fred Murphy. I have been working for the last 2 or 3 years with the Marxist Education Project, which I first came around when I took a class with Richard on French novels. And then I proceeded to study a number of Victor Serge's novels with Richard. I've been leading study groups myself on themes related to science, the environment, climate change, the fight of indigenous peoples against trees, and that whole set of issues that we've already begun to talk about here today. I became a socialist in the late 60s, was involved tremendously in the anti-Vietnam War movement, which I'm reliving somewhat for better or worse in Ken Burns' flawed but very compelling series of documentaries. And then joined a socialist organization and spent about 17 years as either an activist or a journalist, mostly covering Latin America for about 8 years. Spent a couple of years in Nicaragua at the early stages of the Sandinista revolution, traveled to Peru to cover some general strikes, was also in Cuba and Mexico and Argentina at various times. Then this is taking too long, so I apologize. The main point is that I've been a socialist and an activist off and on for the last 40 or more years, and I'm very eager to engage in this project with Richard and our other comrades to try to discover how we can learn from the lessons and mistakes of the past and project a path forward for the achievement of a socially just and environmentally sound future. So that's it.
Go over there where Fred is. Okay.
It's awkward, but we will embrace it.
I'm not awkward, but my name is Michael Lardner, and I will just say that my early life was, I was one of the lucky people. My grandparents were the caretakers of the UAW summer camp 1 hour north of Detroit, and I spent practically every weekend there. Richard probably knows that this is the location where the students from Ann Arbor and other places broke with Harrington and formed SDS and wrote and passed the Port Huron Statement. Beyond that weekend, there were many other weekends where I would see workers from Detroit, Toronto, all kinds of auto workers gather at this camp, and you know, they'd be singing "Which Side Are You On" in the day, and at night be doing the twist with Chubby Checker. And I got to see all of that as a little kid, and still remember that is one of the ambiance of that, of workers educating themselves, having a lot of fun together on the banks of Lake Huron. I know that both Woody and Pete and other people came through and did bonfire sing-alongs on the beach, and the workers actually had a great time there. It was only an hour from the plants in Detroit. Unfortunately, the Ruthers transferred that. They traded land in upper Michigan with the state of Michigan, and that camp was destroyed. And only it's a terrible aspect of that is that the only workers who could go to the camp any longer went in the big. They were like the shop floor supervisors. The rank and file couldn't afford to go any longer. But at that camp is where the UAW would train people to go south. There were buses that I would see go to the south for the freedom marches, for voter rights drives, etc. This was not me being a red diaper baby. My parents were nice people, but had no politics, essentially. But I did get the ambiance, and it lives with me to this day. I learned very early on that it's important to talk to people and listen to people. And I feel that we, with this, can begin to, I mean, we live in a world where the excess labor time by our species could more than feed every single one of us, clothe every one of us, and put us all in a pretty good home. We have this before us. We need to transform, and we can do this without damaging our environment. And we need to get out and talk to people as much as we can. And this is a beginning here. Thank you for pulling this together, all of you who have done so. And greetings to other parts of the world.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Anna. I'm from Ukraine. I do not have a long biography, but not yet, okay? So I'm a student currently. I would like to get my PhD in anthropology because I believe that anthropology as a discipline has a great potential in discovering alternatives to what we are used to see and to what we're made to believe that it's the only way to organize the society and organize our relationship to nature. So I'm an aspiring educator, and I hope that the knowledge that I can receive from meetings organized by Marxist Education and by our friend Richard. I hope that in the future I will be able to convey this knowledge to younger generation as an educator in public university. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't mind. Okay. Hello, I'm John Hudson. My original training is in cognitive anthropology and sociology. My first work was for the UK government's Central Planning and Policy Unit in the Department of Environment, working on the Forest and Meadows econometric world model and alternative energy sources, and this was in the mid-70s. We couldn't do anything. So I then sort of thought, okay, I really need to do organizational stuff. So I then did a degree in organizational studies at the LSE. I became a corporate change, cultural change person for one of Europe's largest companies. And then about the mid-90s, that company was a telecoms company, and it needed to be involved in the internet. So in the mid-90s, I became one of the directors of a project at MIT on the future of the internet. From that, I became a director of two large internet infrastructure companies working on strategic marketing and on business development. And then I gave all that up. And on the way, I trained at the William Allison White Institute in psychoanalysis. And then in 2002, I gave it all up because my real interest is in large cognitive structures and how people think and what stops them engaging in critical thinking. And my particular areas are Shakespeare and the Bible, which are two planks of our culture. So I have some training in both Shakespeare, where I did a degree at the Shakespeare Institute, and also in biblical studies, where I studied at the University of London. And I'm interested in the process of deconstruction and applying structuralist analysis to these texts. My book on Shakespeare, called Shakespeare's Landlady, came out a couple of years ago. I worked with Jenny on a theatre company that actually deconstructs the Shakespearean texts and so that people can actually see through them to the underlying thought patterns and how these are actually biblical parodies. And you'll have to ask me more about that if you're interested.
Hey, good morning or afternoon, whatever time it is now. My name is Jason Hitz. I work on the subway tracks, and so I'm organized by Transport Workers Union Local 100. I'm also a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. My political background, I guess you could call heterodox Trotskyism, just so people know kind of some of the frameworks I use, but I'm open and try to be more and more open to different theoretical traditions and such. So I'm particularly involved in trying to do like organizing within the union, and particularly interested in my union opposing like the police arresting people for jumping the turnstile, which is the first or second most common form of arrest and is obviously racially discriminatory and a class issue. I'm also particularly involved in trying to organize solidarity for the Syrian Democratic Revolution, both in terms of solidarity, in terms of just people knowing about it, but also in terms of like intellectual work, in terms of from it and exposing a real divide in the left in terms of people like projecting their dogmatic frameworks onto it rather than listening to it and acknowledging it and learning from it and integrating that into our work. And in terms of utopian projects, I'm like, I'll just put out like, I read William Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience as like, this isn't going to sound right, but you have to be able to be the tiger to protect the lamb. And it's that dialectic of the lamb being the kind of world we want to live in, but you can't just be the lamb in the world we're in, especially. The Stoics had a utopia that was lost, but one can find it through its critics. So they were criticized just like Marx in the Communist Manifesto. They wanted to free women from patriarchal control. So they said, oh, you want the community of women, like women to belong to the community. The same exact slur was used against the Stoics as against Marx. And then also Spinoza has a concept, he doesn't use the word utopia, but his concept of people, like human beings loving each other and living in harmony. There's a philosophical utopian current in Spinoza, and I think that's important. So look forward to the discussion and us learning from each other.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Tsankov. I'm a recent college graduate. I studied computer science and philosophy. Thank you. I moved to New York recently to pursue my interest in blockchain technology. I think that this technology is currently being leveraged by those with very sort of free market capitalistic tendencies. However, I think this technology, which can do to trust what the internet has done to connectivity, can potentially allow us to build entirely new structures around the world to help solve these problems. So my goal coming to this group, being in New York, is to learn on the ground, how can we collaborate in urban environments to, in an environmentally sustainable way, and to take these worldwide technologies and how can we apply that to multiple different areas while each maintaining their own identity. I think that what we're seeing right now is sort of a capitalism being pushed to its extreme. I don't think that people have often considered what the environmental effects of capitalism will be. And now we're finally starting to figure out that if we maintain this system, it will not work. So my purpose is really to come together, figure out what is a new system to bring into the 21st century that can help us move beyond what has been a system that I believe is running into the ground. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard Wentz, and I came to meet Richard Grieman through Jenny and New Perspectives Theater here, who produced a run of my short plays called Night of the Working Dead. Richard was nice enough to participate in a panel discussion we had right before the last night, and it was really excellent and eye-opening as far as the plight of the working class. I'm a sort of a late stage socialist. I grew up with parents who were best described as silent majority Nixon Republicans. I turned 18 in 1980 and regrettably voted for Ronald Reagan the first time. That immediately went away about a year later when I found theater. I had the good fortune, I think my approach to politics comes from both working in the performance arts. I was lucky enough to work with John Sayles, socialist director, who did a great film called Matewan about the coal mining catastrophe or coal mining wars of West Virginia. And through the Catholic social activists. In 79 and 80, my last year of high school, Daniel Berrigan was resident at my high school in New Orleans. He had been going back and forth to El Salvador. He spoke to our student body, but he was also undergoing treatment in a hospital. My mother was his nurse, so I was able to go in and hang out with him in his hospital room for a while. It was difficult for him, I guess, but I loved it. So, and then I have direct experience with capitalism, having worked in advertising for 5 years before fleeing. I literally ran away from it. Took a job with Trinity Wall Street down on Broadway and Wall Street, and was associated. I got to work with Desmond Tutu for 6 weeks in order to promote and help. We did a live broadcast Q&A with him in the chapel or in the church sanctuary at Trinity Wall Street, and I was able to sort of work with him as he promoted his biography, and we talked at length about, especially for me coming from the South and having direct ties to the Confederacy, it was incredible to sit and speak with him at length about apartheid in South Africa. So that was sort of, currently, my current work is on Ferdinand Pecora and the Senate hearings that occurred right after the crash of 1929, when he actually brought in, you mentioned the Treaty of Versailles, J.P. Morgan Jr., who was the financier for France and England for the war, was also behind their harsh attitude toward Germany and the insistence that the Germans pay for the war, because he wanted essentially to get his money back. So I've written a piece called Fundamentally Sound, which is the Senate hearings where J.P. Morgan was forced to testify. I also, my agent's currently shopping a piece I wrote called 4 Days in May, which is a look at the Kent State shootings. Oddly enough, it's a musical, but it works. We use music from the time. And then I think also currently I'm getting into more of the Catholic social justice by working on a piece now about Dorothy Day, who was founder of the Catholic Workers Union. And I think that we've perverted Christianity so much in this country that and around the world, that we forget that the foundations of Christianity are actually social justice and essentially communism. And so my hope is to subvert the people current sort of look at Christianity by bringing back to the roots through writing and theater. Thanks.
My name is Beth. I'm a retired physical therapist, and I'm not a big talker, so I'm going to be very brief. I'm here because I think it's very important to get beyond no. And I guess my way of doing that is to work with community gardeners, and I participate in a couple of community gardens, and I've recently started working with a local group in Harlem where I live called We Act for Environmental Justice. So that's it.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Hort. I'm going to be helping Fred with a lot of the technical stuff. And I'm pretty excited, actually, to be working with Fred and Richard and Mike. And hopefully it's going to be good. I have a reasonably long and extensive family background in lefty politics. And I have an undergraduate degree from Brandeis University in metaphysics. So hopefully all that's going to help me to keep up with some of the academics that are going to be going on here. And it is my hope going forward that once we get ourselves a little situated, I think Richard had said, which I think is really accurate, that in order to really be able to push these things forward, you have to have a lucid plan in the first place, that I'm very optimistic that we're going to get to that point. And when we do, I have a fledgling publishing company that I'm working on with Mike. And I do a lot of art and comic book related industry type things, which includes a reasonably significant amount of work in the Caribbean, particularly in Barbados. So I'm very excited to be able to take some of these things and push them upfield. So let's get at it, folks.
Okay, so we are at 12:59, but I think we're going to stay for a little bit here and there. I don't know what happens if we just unmute everybody and it's a free for all, but we did want to kind of, because today was a slightly different, today was about introductions as opposed to sort of content oriented. So we want to make sure everybody knows what's happening moving forward. Has everyone registered? Did everyone get invited to the Dropbox link? Does everybody know about the wiki? Do you know what's expected of you in terms of week to week? Kind of just what our shape is. Should I try to summarize it? So we have a couple pieces. So in terms of the course, in the Dropbox, there's a syllabus with themes for each week. So next week's theme is looking at pre-existing utopias, other visions of utopia, some of which have been referred to already today. I'll come back to that. So each week there's a theme, and what we're going to ask is for folks to basically assign themselves one or two themes that interest them the most, and then there'll be a small group that leads the following discussion. So for example, say I'm making this up. This is not real. I'm making this up. Say Richard and John and I wanted to have the power of art as a transformational process in human history as our theme. By early in the week, we would post a bunch of readings for everybody to kind of read along to. And then that following Sunday, we would lead that conversation. We would have some summaries, some questions, and lead that. So for next week, because it's coming up, we are going to ask for some volunteers to lead the conversation, but Richard has already posted a couple articles, so you don't have like a 24-hour turnaround to go think of all the great utopias, although you can. So all of this in our Dropbox, which is our virtual home, our virtual library for all of this. So that's the sort of course, that's our reading and our communal sort of education and our conversation. In tandem with that is writing our future history. And Fred, that's on the wiki, correct? So futurehistorians.org, where Richard has posted, his initial version of this, but this is where the collective writing is going to take place. And I think that's a thing that we're gonna, it's going to emerge, right? Because we want multiple paths, people write in different ways. Some people are more comfortable writing, some people are more comfortable speaking, some people are more comfortable drawing. So that's going to kind of emerge, right? All of this will emerge. We're emergent. Is that the base? Did I hit the basics, Fred?
The important thing of all is that we need everyone's email address.
Yes.
I'm passing that around.
Legibly written so that we can add you to the Dropbox and enable you to edit the future historians.
Great.
And stay in the loop.
Yes, absolutely. So yes, your clear email addresses that you at least occasionally check are the most important so that you can be invited to participate in any of those things. Questions about that? Comments?
Well, I'm the one that designed this under the influence of Jenny, who is a modern person and who is currently a graduate student at Baruch College, where they have a wonderful, what they call a hybrid course, which includes meetings like this, plus work that's done online, and where students form into teams. But they have a platform for that. And I thought that the Dropbox, where we can deposit articles, could serve as that, and maybe it can. But basically, I think I designed a machine that was a little bit too complicated to work. And I only realized that last night. So I just took the initiative of proposing some readings, and it's not definitive, for next week, because I didn't want people to leave here with no idea of what to do. And so the readings you find in the Dropbox, it's under the topics, class topics is the big folder in there. We invite you, and that's why we want your, okay, so we send you an invitation and you just click on it and then you're in there. And we also send you instructions on how to get into the Dropbox. And then inside, there's a kind of inventory. I think it's called How to Navigate the Dropbox or something like that. So if you go to next week's class, which is called Ecotopia, the first item in it is called bibliography, and it has a whole lot of articles, including ones by Sam, who spoke here before, and by Brian Tokar and me, and Peter Hudis, who was unable to make it because he's in another meeting in Chicago at this point. Recommending that to start, everybody look at the wiki and look at a very kind of, well, let's call it a sketch pad and not put it down, of a possible utopia that I put in there, which will be the canvas on which we'll write something. So that, and I also recommend there's Emanuel Wallerstein, who has written a book called Utopistics, and who is my comrade from Columbia when we took over the university in 1968, and is well known as a world systems theorist. He is on YouTube in a very lucid interview. So those are the things that we put on. And then Castoriadis has been mentioned. He was one of my teachers. And so his famous, well, to me anyway, crucial reading was called The Content of Socialism. And although Castoriadis doesn't like the word, or didn't like the word, utopia, which means no place, and he's a Greek, so he took it quite literally, but he outlined a picture of a autonomous, self-organized economy, asking people to click on this and then read just chapter 7, which is a few pages, where he describes, the same way that I do in my attempt at utopia, how such a thing could work. And we'll put Sam's article up. Well, it's already in the Dropbox. All right. The problem is that the Dropbox has maybe 20 pieces that could be of interest. So we need is this committee, this team that was supposed to form, except I couldn't figure out where he could form and how the people could talk to each other. So we'll work on that this week. We could go in there and muck about, and you're all invited to post articles and to comment on the articles. That was the idea, that in the Dropbox, if the articles are in the form of a doc, period doc, you can just click on comments and make comments on them so that we can have a discussion leading up to or preparing the next meeting. But the whole idea is that we sort of do some reading and think about these things and have a little dialogue before we meet here so that we can enrich each other and have a really interesting conversation, and a conversation oriented towards brainstorming about what things we can put into the wiki that would make it more realistic, richer, more interesting and attractive. So we'll know more next week when we get together around this.
So the critical last thing before we leave the room is 2 or 3 folks to commit to saying, I will go to the Dropbox tonight, and then sort of choose a good number of articles that you commit to reading and speaking on and letting the other folks.
Why is this, like, so they're being trained to introduce themselves and have eye contact?
Ooh, I just heard, is that an echo? That's weird. Anyway,
why is eye contact?
Oh, anyway, we have a ghost in the machine. Woo! In somebody's house.
Why is having the
who would like to take on utopias for next week? I'm not it because I have actual graduate school.
eye contact is that actually achieving the larger goal?
Michael's giving me a dirty look.
It's not dirty at all. Next week is the 4th and last session of the group that comes in after this.
Okay.
So,
any brave souls to lead next week's conversation? Articles already picked for you. So, yes. Anna, who's going to join us?
Our friends online are also welcome to join.
Yes.
Okay.
Woo, oh, John, awesome. Okay.
So as long as it's clear what those articles are.
Yeah, so how many have you posted?
The ones that I just mentioned.
Yeah, but is it like online? Does it, when you go online or when you email me, does it say which ones they are? So like specific folder. Specific folder.
in the green on the left bottom corner.
And we could also maybe give you this piece of paper if you want that as a reference. I also just want to also say how kind of awesome it is that some of us in this room are like pushing 80 and all of this stuff. Right? This is cool. 21st century. 21st century. Woo. Okay, that ends our official.
Why don't we have a round of goodbyes to the people who are online? And
yeah, let's unmute.
Say anything they want.
So, any final thoughts, feelings, comments from anywhere in the world?
Well, it's a very impressive group of people, and I look forward to seeing it continue.
Yeah, this is a great beginning. Looking forward to seeing what happens.
Thanks, Brian. And Moscow. Thank you. Oh, how do we say goodbye? Oh, до свидания. До свидания.
Oh my God. Okay. Yeah, see you next week.